All right, folks, let's go ahead and get started. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you're joining us from today. And also hello to those of you who will be watching this on replay. Before we get started with today's Gen Community webcast, I have a few things to go over before I hand you off to Kim Peelman. First, a few questions along the way, and we always hope that you do. Please use the questions box along the right-hand side of your screen. To submit those, we'll get through as many of those as we can during our time together today. If for some reason we don't get through everything, either we run out of time or something requires a little bit of research, I will make sure that Clay and Kim and Dylan all get everything they need to follow up with you after. Secondly, we are recording today's session. The replay will be available out in the Gen community either later today or sometime tomorrow. And the last thing from me is we want to make sure these webcasts are valuable and that you're getting the information that you expect. So with that in mind, a short survey is going to pop up at the end of the webcast. If you could stick around for an extra 30 seconds and give us some feedback, I know the whole team would appreciate it. That's it for me. So I'm going to hand you off to Kim Peelman, who is the product owner for Gen, for some introductions.
Thank you, Lynn. Welcome, everybody. We are very enthusiastic about what we're doing with RESTful services with Gen. And there's a whole ecosystem around what we're building for you. Today's conversation is focused on consuming RESTful APIs, so calling out to those existing REST services and bringing that information into your Gen applications. You may also be interested in publishing RESTful APIs. So for that, we've been partnering with Response Systems. You may also be interested in simplifying your user experience, and we've been partnering with IET on their products like Studio Developer. So hand in hand, we're building these features and we're partnering with other companies to try and get it to you faster. Now, we are eager for your feedback along the way. So if you're interested in being a pre-release tester, or if you've adopted it and you have some feedback, or if you want to do a design thinking workshop to analyze what do you have and how can you use these better, our user experience team loves to facilitate those type of conversations, customized conversations for your Gen applications at your company. So we are eager to get that information to you. Stay connected with us in the community. That's how you're going to see when we have updates. We'll have new knowledge articles. We'll have blogs, how to best use all of this functionality to take advantage of RESTful APIs and breaking down those silos and making Gen a part of your natural architecture in your company. So that's my product management pitch for why these are so valuable to you. But today we're going to focus on that technical side of how do you get started? What are the mechanics you need to get started? And that's why I brought Clay in here to give you all the details. So Clay, take it away.
All righty, thanks, Kim. As Kim was saying, we just back in January, we put out our initial release of the Consuming RESTful APIs feature. And then we put out an enhancement in June of this year where we added native support for some different security schemes. And so we just wanted to have this webinar today to kind of give you a high-level overview of all the different pieces you'll need to be able to get this feature and start using it. And we want you to use it and be successful with it. So we're going to kind of walk through that today. This is the disclaimer slide. I don't think I'm going to be talking about any future direction or anything today, but if I do, just realize it's subject to change. So before I jump into the details of getting the feature, Kim touched on it a little bit. You'll hear us talking about consumption and publishing of RESTful APIs. And what do we mean by consumption? Consumption means that your Gen generated application can call out to some REST service for some reason to get data potentially and bring that back into the Gen application and use it. For those of you that have maybe already used the call external, the new call REST statement that we've added is very similar. The call external, of course, was doing a SOAP call, where call REST is doing an HTTP call. The call external was using XML. The call REST is doing JSON. And the call external had a WSDL that described the service. And the call REST statement, we're using an open API specification to describe the service. And when we talk about publishing, that means that the Gen generated application can make itself available as a service endpoint. So you can have other users be a client that talks to your Gen generated application as a RESTful service. And as Kim mentioned, one of our partners, Response Systems, has the Web Services Genius product that can be used to do that with Gen. So let's get started. It's fairly simple to get the new feature installed. I've broke it down into 5 steps, but some of the steps you'll see here are things that you don't normally do when you apply a PTF, like updating the schema tables and having to convert your model. And so that's what kind of why we wanted to have this talk today, and just make sure that everybody's clear on what needs to happen, what you need to do to your encyclopedias, what you need to do to your models to be able to take advantage of the new call REST statement. So the first step is going to be to apply the PTFs. So on the workstation side, we've got a couple of toolset PTFs. The TSN 86221 was the initial PTF that was released in January. That's where we added the initial support for the call REST statement. And then TSN 86225 came out in June, and that's where we added the native support for different security schemes. The GEN 86212 PTF is what updated the action block generator for COBOL and Java to support the call REST statement. The BTN 86209 PTF is adding support to the build tool to be able to build the Java applications. And the 2 RTJ PTFs add the Java runtime support for the call REST statement. And then the later one also added the native support for the security schemes. So if you've already applied Gen or the WKS 86200 or the Gen 86 complete PTFs, then you could go ahead and apply these PTFs today. But if you don't want to have to do that, an alternative would be to get the PTF that we just put out, what, last week, I think, maybe, or maybe the week before. We created a new consolidation PTF, WKS 86300. And if you apply that one PTF, then you'll get all those 6 PTFs listed above, because they're all rolled into that one PTF. The 86300 PTF is just a roll-up or a consolidation PTF of everything that came after the Gen 86 complete PTF or the WKS 86200 PTF. So those are the PTFs you'll need if you have the workstation product. If you have a CSE or client server encyclopedia, there's one PTF for each CSE platform. So there's a CSI PTF for the HP UX platform. There's the CSN PTF for the Windows platform, and the CSR PTF for the AIX platform. And once again, if you're at the complete level or some level of PTFs after that, you might just want to get those 200 series PTFs. But if you're ready to jump to the 300 series, you could go ahead and get the consolidation PTF and get everything in one shot. And you will notice that the WKS 86300 is the same for the Windows CSE as what we looked at for the workstation. Now, if you have a host encyclopedia, these are the PTFs you will need to get for the feature. The first PTF isn't technically part of the consuming REST feature, but it is a PTF, a prereq PTF that you're going to have because we had to update one of the DD-defs in your CSI to include the C++ runtime libraries. So you'll need to get that PTF, the LU03643 PTF. And after you apply that PTF, we give you a job, and you'll have to customize that job and run it so that you can update your CSI. The next 3 PTFs were the ones that were released in January for the initial release of the product. The LU03408 PTF, add support for the host encyclopedia and the generators. There's some skeletons and some sample-like members that were also updated. So after you apply that PTF, you'll need to rebind the packages like you often have to do on a host encyclopedia PTF that has DBRMs in it. One other thing that's in that PTF that is kind of unusual is that we redelivered the sample and the help models. And the reason we did that is because we reconverted those models so that they could have call REST statements added to them. So you may not need to do these steps where you run the CE job 12 and the CE job 13 to reload those models. You really only need to do that if you plan to maybe start playing around with the sample model or the help model and you want to add a call REST statement to one of them. The 3409 and 3410 PTFs just provide the kind of the common module and the CICS runtime support for the call REST statement. And then the LU 05281 PTF is where we added the security scheme support. So Kim, I'm just checking to make sure I'm still audible and make sure there's no questions coming in yet.
Yep, you're doing great. And since she gave me the opportunity, I'm going to do my little pitch for technical currency. The best way to make sure you guys are getting this stuff as soon as it's available is to stay up to date on your PTFs. You don't want to have your prerequisites bogging you down. We offered you the consolidation PTFs now to help you catch up. And once you catch up, it's easier to keep up. So just stick with us as we do a continuous delivery. You guys can be doing continuous adoption, and you're going to be getting this functionality way faster and way simpler. So, thank you.
Thank you, Kim. So the second step that we had on our agenda today is to update the encyclopedia schema tables. The initial PTFs that we delivered, we sent out updated data for the schema tables. And so you need to reload your encyclopedia schema tables. On the CSE, you run the CSE config command and you select the update encyclopedia tables to this release option. And that will reload the schema tables on the CSE. On the host encyclopedia, you use CE job 05, or if you want to, you use CA job 05 to reload the schema tables on the host encyclopedia. The next step will be to convert your existing models. If you're creating a new model in the toolset, there's no reason to have to convert it because the toolset will already be adding the necessary objects. But if you have an existing model, you need to convert that model to the 9A2s, sorry, the 92A6 schema level. So even if you've already converted it, say when you first came maybe from 7.6 to 8.0, if you converted your model to the 92A6 schema level, to be able to do the call REST or add the call REST statement to your existing models, you need to convert them again. So on the CSE, you can use the encyclopedia client, or you can use the convert model server command to perform the model conversion. And on the host encyclopedia, it's option 1.3.11 from the host encyclopedia main menu to get to the model conversion utilities. So once you get all the PTFs installed, you've updated your schema tables, you've converted your models, you're now ready to start trying to add a call REST statement to your application. So a call REST statement is very similar to a call external statement, if anybody has used those before, or it's very similar to external action block, which I know probably most of you have probably used. So there are some restrictions on the action block that contains the call REST statement. It cannot be a procedure step. It has to be its own separate action block. The only statements that can be in that action block are the call REST statement itself and possibly note statements. only the import and export views are used. And just another limitation is that if you're currently using the compatibility feature on ZOS, you can't mark a call REST action block as being a compatibility action block. So I'll say that's very similar to the way like an external action block, you can only add the external statement in there or notes. And same way with the call external, you can only have the call external statement or notes. And so call REST follows that same pattern. So once you go and you create your new action block, you see I've got one called my first call REST action block that I created. And you go to do edit add statement, you will now see right below the call external statement, there is a call REST statement or menu item. And you click that. And this is the dialog that will pop up. The first field is talking about an Open API spec. And so you're maybe wondering what is an Open API spec? And that's just like I had mentioned earlier, for a SOAP service, it's kind of usually it has a WSDL describing the service, what its imports are, what its exports are, what operations it can do. An Open API spec is very similar for a REST service. It can describe the endpoints and operations, the inputs and outputs, if it's got any authentication requirements, and other types of information like that. So we provide two ways for you to get that information into your model to be able to create the call REST statement. One is you may have a URL that your RESTful web service provider sent to you. And so you can just put that URL in the first field there where it says Open API spec URI. You can put in the URI that they provide you in there, click the go button. The tool set will go out to that URL, read the Open API spec, import it into the tool set, and present the information that it needs to present. The other option is you may get a Open API spec file. Initially, we only supported that file being in JSON format, but now it can be JSON or YAML, either one. And so if you have a file, then you would click the browse button and navigate to wherever that file is located and click OK. And then the toolset would read that file and once again, bring in all the information from the spec and put it into the toolset. Kim, I'm just checking. Any questions on any of that so far?
Nope, no questions coming in.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks.
So the next field on the panel is the service name. And the service name is just an alias or a logical name representing essentially the host and port of the machine that's hosting the RESTful web service. We allow it to be up to 32 characters. For Java applications, that service name is used as a key into the call REST properties file. We'll talk about that file later. And for CICS, we only use the first 8 characters of the service name, and the first 8 characters have to match the URI map resource that you've defined in your CICS region. And we'll talk about URI maps more later too. So on this screen, you can see I had a JSON file that had a spec in it, and so I had clicked the browse button and pointed to this file, brought it in, and you can see it loaded in some information from the spec down there in the select a resource box. And then I decided I wanted to name this service vehicle because this service is provided by the NHTSA the government agency in the US here. It's National Highway and Traffic Safety Administration or something like that. And they provide safety data on vehicles. And so that's why when you go to provide a value for your service name, you probably want to make it something that's reasonable. So since I'm talking about vehicles for this service, I decided to name my service name that. Down in the select a resource box, you can see that my OpenAPI spec provided 5 different endpoints that service provides. You'll also notice that all 5 of them are just GET requests. But Gen, we do support GET, POST, PUT, and delete HTTP methods. So once I decide which endpoint I want to be hitting with my call REST statement, I select that in the select a resource box. And once I've filled in, the OpenAPI spec information, the service name, and selected a resource, the add button now becomes enabled. And so I can click add to take me to the next panel. So when you click add, this dialog will pop up. And in the lower left panel that's highlighted in red, we show essentially the imports that the REST service has told us it needs from the OpenAPI spec. So in this particular one, we see it doesn't have any request body parameters. Everything's in the path. So that's why you see parameters.path make, parameters.path.model year. And if you also look up at the top of that panel under the resource, you can see model year and make are path parameters. They're in the actual URL that's going to be used. But if you were doing a put or post request, you would most likely see body elements in here. The different. So if you were needing to send, a vehicle ID number to update something, then you would probably see something that said body.vehicle ID or something. There's also other types of parameters. There's cookie parameters, header parameters, and query parameters that you might see. The other information that you see in that lower left-hand panel is it shows you the JSON data type that the OpenAPI spec said that it requires or uses. And then you'll see there's some other items in there called configuration connection timeout, request timeout, etc. Those didn't actually come from the spec. Those are values that Gen provides to give you ways to customize your configuration more dynamically. And we're going to talk about configuration later on too.
Clay, did I lose you? All right, looks like we might have gotten a pause from Clay. So I want to fill the air with some more information. Oh, he changed slides. Hey, Clay.
Yes.
We lost your audio there for a minute. Can you start the information back on the slide again?
Oh, I think we lost him again.
Uh-oh.
He's still showing us connected, so that usually says to me it's definitely a connectivity issue. We apologize, folks, but as I think we all know, sometimes these sorts of things happen.
The love-hate relationship of technology.
Exactly. Oh, it
Clay,
looks like
all right, let me see what the chat.
Oh,
Clay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, hi, there you are.
Hi, I don't know what's happening.
Well, you're back now.
Okay. Well, if you hear silence, speak up.
Will do.
Do you know about what point did you not hear anything on this screen?
On this screen, we heard up to the point where you said we will talk more about configuration later.
Oh, okay. That wasn't much then. I didn't say much
Yep.
after that. So the next slide shows, we're going to talk about the lower right-hand panel on this dialog. This shows the gen views that you can match to the import parameters that the REST service requires. So your import views in your call REST action block would be matched to the import parameters for the REST service. There is a default push button. If you click that push button, Jen will create all the necessary views for you. He's going to match everything that the REST service says he needs. Whether you really need it or not, we're going to create views for it and do the view matching for you. The alternative is you could create your views yourself and define your attribute sizes and decimal places and stuff like that yourself. So the default is easier and quicker, maybe if you're just doing this for the first time and trying it, but the choices we make when you do default may not be optimal. And so you may, even if you use default, you may want to come back along later and possibly change the attribute definitions that we created for you. And just one little note there is that Gen supports blob on the distributed platforms, but we do not support blobs on the mainframe, on the ZOS platform. So you will not be able to do that if you're doing the CICS applications. You won't be able to use blobs. So once you match the import parameters that you need to match, you click OK, and it will take you to the next panel. And as you can see, this one is doing the export parameters. So these are the parameters that the REST service is going to be sending back in its response. In the example I show, this particular OpenAPI spec only showed an HTTP response code of 200, and it shows the data that's returning if it gets a 200. It's very likely, though, that your service may give you values for, or it may send you a different response if you get a 400 or a 500 or a 401, 402, 403 or something. You may get a different response. So your OpenAPI spec may give you multiple messages or multiple possible responses that you may want to map or match to Gen views. Once again, it's showing you the JSON data types. And then there's two, just like on the import side, we had a bunch of configuration items that Gen adds that are not in the spec. On the export side, Gen will always add the HTTP response code and the HTTP response message. And those do not come from the spec, but Gen populates those to help you be able to know whether your call REST statement was successful or if you want to retry or whatever. And just like on the import view, on the export view, the lower right-hand side is also describing the Gen views. Once again, you can do the default push button, or you can manually create the views yourself. But as I mentioned earlier, when you use the default push button, Gen's going to create view sizes to hold the largest thing that Gen can hold. So text attributes will be defined, 4094 varying length. I think numerics, I think we generate them as 18 digits and 6 decimal places or something like that. And so that, that may not be optimal for what your service is really returning. And so hopefully you will know your data better than we do, and you can maybe either manually create your views yourself ahead of time, or you can let the default do it, and then you go back and adjust those attribute that, well, the sizes and different values on your attributes. The other thing is with repeating group views, when you do the default, it creates a separate repeating group view for essentially every entity type. And so that may not necessarily really be the way you want the data structured. So you may have to then, if you do the default and you want the values nested differently, you may have to go in there and do change parent and move some of the views around to get them in the structure you really want. The other thing is that when you do the default is that the gen and view attributes that we create are not marked as nullable. So after you do that and you click OK, then your call REST statement has been added. And if you look there, this is what it looks like when it's completed. You'll see it says call REST web service. The first node shows the service name. The second part of that is the HTTP verb or HTTP method that was chosen. And then the next part is showing you essentially the service endpoint that you chose. You also see your views. And one thing you will notice is that in mine, I went back and I updated some of my views to be nullable. And you can do that through view maintenance. You go up there to the little red and blue icon in the toolbar, click view maintenance, select whatever view attributes you want to make nullable, right click them, select edit, and choose nullable. And the reason you want to do that is it's very common that REST services sometimes may return nulls for certain values in their response. And if it sends a null, but your gen view is not nullable, then you're going to get a runtime error because we won't be able to stick a null in a non-nullable view. I mentioned that gen will always populate the HTTP response code and HTTP response message if it can. And so if you match those to your export views in your call REST action block, then you can send those back to its caller and use that to decide for error handling. So if you get a 401 or something, you may want to retry or something like that. But you can make decisions on that response code, whether you what action you want to take. There are some conditions where we're not able to populate the HTTP response code and message. And in that case, if you're familiar with the way call external did error handling, was it offers the approach of using inline code. And so if we're not able to populate the response code and response message, we'll put some information in glob data and you can use inline code to get that. Okay, so we now have got our call REST statement added. We've got our action block created. We've got the view matching done. We're getting ready to run it, but there's some configuration that you're probably going to need to do. So the Open API spec may not really have the real base URL, may not even have a base URL, or it may not have the correct one that's appropriate for all your different environments. For example, you may hit one service when you're running in development, or you may hit a different service when you're doing QA, and even a third different one when you're doing production. And so you certainly wouldn't want to have to go edit your Open API spec, change the URL in there, and then recode your call REST statement all over again. So we needed to give you a way to change your configuration without having to go change your model. For Java applications, we kind of give you a few ways to do that. One is with the call REST properties file that we had mentioned earlier. And there you can set different options. You can change the base URL. You can change connection timeout, request timeout. And you can do that at a global level so that all services use those values, or you can do it at a service specific level. So in the example I show down at the bottom, I show 3 examples. The first one is where I'm changing the base URL. So you use your service name, and my service name was vehicle. And let's say that my OpenAPI spec had, well, in fact, my OpenAPI spec did say https api.nitsa.gov was all it had. But let's say for some reason NITSA needed me to hit a different server endpoint. And so they told me I needed to use port 1999, and they're also, this is version 2 of their API or something. And so they also added v2 to their base URL. And so I could change that in the call rest.properties file. And then I wouldn't have to go change my call rest statement. I wouldn't have to do anything in the toolset to change that. I just change it in the call rest.properties file. Likewise, in the connection timeout, if you just say connection timeout and give it the value, in this case, I use 60 seconds, all my services will time out if the connection hasn't been made in 60 seconds. But let's say my vehicle service, which is hitting NITSA, I know that it's notoriously slow or something, and so I need it to be a little bit longer time. So in this case, if you say service name dot connection timeout, then that will apply just to the vehicle service. So the call rest properties is one way to do configuration. The second way was all those configuration parameters that we saw when we were looking at the import parameters for each REST service. The same type of information that's in the call rest properties is also in those configuration parameters. So if you wanted to change the base URL more dynamically in your pad logic, so maybe you're going to go read something from a database that says, oh, I'm in QA, I need to use this base URL. And so you could read that from the database, match it to your view that's being the configuration.base URL, or sorry, configuration.url parameter. And therefore you don't have to worry about editing a properties file. Your pad logic will take care of that for you. Same way with connection timeout or any of the other values, you could potentially create your own entity type with all these different things in it and go read that entity type to get the values you want at runtime. So it's actually possible to do multiple approaches. You can do the call rest properties file as well as the configuration parameters. And for the URL, that's actually also a user exit. And so you're thinking, if I use all of those, what's the precedence? What's going to take priority? And so this is the hierarchy here. So from lowest to highest, the default is whatever is in your OpenAPI spec, or for other values, it's whatever Gen uses as its default value. So like the connection timeout, I think our default is maybe 300 seconds. But if you set a global property in the call rest properties file, then that can override the default. So if you said connection timeout equals 60, then that would override the 300 that was done by default. And then if you want to override that for a particular service, like we did on the previous slide, you could say, vehicle.connection timeout is 120, then that would override the global values. If you use the configuration parameters that you matched at import, when you were matching the imports, those will override whatever's in the call rest properties file. And lastly, for the URL and the URL only, there's actually a user exit, and there's a modify URL method in the web service method call exit that allows you to override any of the previous settings as far as the URL is concerned.
Nicely outlined, Clay, thank you. We did have a question on a previous slide, and it was saying, can we write regular gen logic in the action block, which contains call rest statements?
No, you cannot, but you can, get the data back in the export views and send them back to the action block or the P step that call the call REST action block.
Thank you.
So the previous couple of slides, we're focusing more on the Java applications. Now we're going to talk about the CICS applications. CICS uses a URI map resource, and we're going to talk, I'll explain more about the URI map later, but the URI map resource essentially gives you a way to provide the server and port of the machine that's hosting the service. We also, for CICS applications, can use a subset of those configuration parameters. And the main one that you could possibly use there is the configuration.service name. So if you needed to change from if you needed to hit, say, your development service instead of your QA service, instead of your production service, you could go into CICS, edit your URI map resource to change the host and port in there. And so you're doing all that outside of Gen, you're doing that within CICS itself. And so you could update your base URL essentially that way without having to modify your application. If you use the configuration.service name, then you could actually do similar to what you did with Java, and you could go read something from a database and say, oh, I want to change my service name or my URI map name to my production one. And the benefit of that is, in the mainframe environment, jobs are very siloed oftentimes. So instead of the Gen developer having to wait for their CICS systems programmer to go edit the URI map for them, maybe you could have your CICS systems programmer create you 3 URI maps to begin with, one for development, one for QA, one for production, give them all 3 different names. And then at runtime, in your pattern logic, you could set your configuration.service name to the appropriate value. And that way you wouldn't have to wait for your CICS systems programmer to update your URI map resource. So what is a URI map? It's just another CICS resource. And I've highlighted the key fields that you're going to be concerned with. The first one is the URI map, and that's the name of the URI map. Whatever those characters are, it's what the first 8 characters should be when you enter the service name in the tool set. They have to match for us to be able to find that URI map. The second one is the usage field, and that has to be set to client, because since we're consuming a RESTful service, the Gen application is actually acting as a HTTP client. The scheme can be HTTP or HTTPS, and then the key values are the host and port. And so that's where you're going to put like I said, the information about the machine that's actually hosting your REST service. And the path doesn't really matter to Gen, because we use other information you entered in the tool set or that came out with the open API spec. And so Gen is really only using the URI map to make the initial web connection. One more field on the URI map is the socket close field. And for performance reasons, you would want to set this to a non-zero value. And that is the way you tell CICS that you would like him to keep that connection open. I mean, it's not a definite that it will keep it open, but it's kind of a hint or an ask of CICS to leave the connection open. And so if you're calling the same REST service over and over, maybe you have it in a loop and it's getting called 1,000 times or something, you would hate to have to create that connection and close it, create that connection, close it 1,000 times. And so by setting the socket close value to a non-zero value, you're telling CICS to take advantage of connection pooling and to be able to reuse that connection. So configuring Java was actually fairly easy. When you get to CICS application, there is more work to do. The initial PTFs, like I said, it provided some sample members and some skeletons. And so if you've customized any of those skeletons or any of those sample members, then of course you'll need to make sure you have a backup copy before you apply those PTFs. And then once you apply the PTFs, you'll need to merge your customizations back into those members if you've customized them. The two that I mentioned there in that first item, the MTQ default and the TIRM TQB2 members, those are used for customizing the error messages. So you may not like the way Jen worded messages, so you may want to change that, or you may want to present messages in a different language. If so, you may have customized those sample members. And if so, you'll need to merge your customizations in with the new ones that came in from the PTF. And then you'll need to run the make 5 exits job to rebuild the TIRM TQBZ user exit DLL. Another item that's a little different is the TIRxInfo sample member. If you're already doing cooperative applications, you're probably familiar with that sample member. That's how you tell Jen what code page your CICS applications are using. And so if you're doing cooperative, then you've already done this step. But if you're doing online package applications and you're wanting to add call rest statements to those, then this is an additional step that you're going to now have to do. You're going to have to make sure you edit the TIRxInfo sample member, tell us what code page your CICS region is using, and then you'll need to rebuild the TIRxInfo or TIRxINFZ user exit DLL, and you can do that with the make C run job. We also provided a couple of new runtime routines with the call rest functionality. One is called TIR ABRT, and then there's also one called TIR ABRTC. So you'll need new CICS program definitions for those. And we provide a sample member called NDEF-CICS that will give you an example or give you a way that you can run that to create those definitions in your region, or you can do it yourself manually outside of June. And so once you've got all that done and you're ready to actually put this into your CICS region, you'll need to copy these 5 DLLs that I show here into your CICS DFH RPL concatenation and perform a new copy on them. And then finally, you'll need to create URI map definitions for all of the RESTful web services servers that you may be hitting. So as you saw in my example from NHTSA, there was the OpenAPI spec had 5 or 6 different endpoints. So I don't need to create 5 or 6 different URI maps. I just need one URI map for the NHTSA server. Okay, so I know I went a little fast and we covered a lot of things at a high level, but you may be wondering, where can I get more information? The best place is actually our tech docs. There's a topic called add a call rest statement. Let me see if I can jump out and show you that. So if you look up here in the left-hand side, underneath add a call rest statement, there's a whole bunch of subtopics. And a lot of the links that I have in my presentation are pointing to some of these subtopics. But this is the good starting point. This kind of walks you through what you need to do to add a call rest statement. And then there's more details on all these different subtopics. So this is probably a good starting point. There's also links here to toolset messages. That's also on TechDocs. Those are a little bit harder to find, but if you just go to the main toolset messages link, and then you just do a find in your browser for whatever message you're seeing on your toolset, and that can help you find that. Similar with runtime messages, there's a runtime messages link, and just most of the new runtime messages dealing with the call rest statement are in the 300 series. So it'd be like TIRM 304E or something, might be one of them. If you're in the tool set and you have questions, you can always hit the F1 or the help push button on the different toolset dialogues, and that will actually take you to some of these same pages that are on TechDocs. And then we've also put out several knowledge base articles. The Getting Started and the FAQ both cover a lot of the same information we've covered today, but it might present it slightly differently. So I definitely recommend getting those articles and reading through them. The security one is one we put out after we released in January, because at that time we did not have native support for the different security schemes. But that article was showing you how, if you knew what you were doing, there were ways that you could modify your open API spec to get that information into Gen, and then it showed you different ways that you could code Gen action blocks to do this, the different security schemes. But like I said, in June of this year, we did release native support for those security schemes. And so the authentication article, the last one there, is showing you the newer, more simplified way of doing security without having to manually modify your open API spec. And Kim, I think that is it. I actually got done a little quicker than I thought it would.
Fantastic.
So
Perfect
hopefully we have
pacing.
time for some questions.
Yes, we do have a couple more. So from one of our Java users, he asked, can I use call rest in the client side in Java, or is it designed for the server side only?
You can use it either one, either place.
Great. And then there's another question somebody asked, I noticed you use something called echo serve or echo rest as an example. Is that a code example that can be shared? And is it based on echo?
It's not based on the echo tran that you may be familiar with that Gen provides, like for testing from the client manager. I think that particular service is just one that Dylan created that we were using during testing, and it just does what it says. It just, whatever we sent it, it would echo it back. As far as providing those examples, I know we have started putting out some knowledge base articles that have models attached to them. And so I think maybe that would be a good, one of the next things we could do is maybe we could look at providing a sample model that shows you that's already got a call rest statement in it, or several call rest statements in it. It's just the trouble with that is finding a service that all of our customers can access. And the services we have are internal services that are only available to us. But like the NHTSA service that I was showing in my example, some of my examples today, is a public service that is available. Unfortunately, it runs with HTTPS, so it's a little more complicated to set up if you want to try to do that from CICS, but from Java, it was very easy to do from Java. So that might be a model that we could release. Because I built a model that hits that service, and it used all 5 of those endpoints that I showed in the example. So first it goes out and gets all the years that NHTSA has data for, and then once you select a year, it goes out and gets all the vehicle makes for that year. And when you select a make, it goes out and gets all the models for that year and make. And then once you select a model, then it goes and gets all the kind of the subtypes of that model. And then once you select one of those, and it goes and it brings you back the safety data. So, I mean, I really like that the NHTSA services are very easy to use, and they're very useful. So I think that might be a good knowledge-based article that we could look at writing and publishing.
Great, I'll add that to our list. And
Okay,
very soon I will be putting out a post in the Gen Edge community to share some of those new samples that we recently started publishing. So if you guys have requests for sample models or sample code or anything like that, feel free to let me know, email me or put it in the community and say, hey guys, can we get a sample like this? In fact, if you have your own samples to share, that's where I really would get excited, is if you customers start sharing information as well. So keep that shared knowledge together.
I didn't mean to let the cat out of the bag. I'm sorry.
No, that's good. I'm really glad. It's very timely. If I haven't said it enough, hint, hint, joining the Gen Edge community is one of the most powerful things you can do to stay informed. We're sharing stuff like those models and knowledge articles, blogs, and the more customers we have on there, the better the conversation is, so you guys can share with each other. So please, please, please invite your colleagues to join the community as well. And just sign up for it gives you like a notification once a day or a week or something like that to say, hey, here's what's been going on. Yeah. Oh, and as far as what's coming up next, hint, I know we had that disclaimer in the beginning, everything can change and everything will, but what you saw today was for Java and for CICS. We are working on, or we have in the queue to work on consuming REST for COBOL Batch and C Windows and .NET. And if those are important to you, let me know, because that helps determine our priority and the sequence that we deliver the stuff in. Similarly, for all of these, we're starting with the post. What are the fourth of the put, delete? I forget the 4 methods. There are other methods. We started with those 4 because based on customer demand, those are the 4 you guys need. But once we get more languages supported, then we'll also expand those methods. So stay informed of upcoming developments by joining the community. Put, post. I used to be really good at saying those. Put, post, delete.
We'll practice on
LMNOP.
that. We'll do better next time.
Yeah, I need to. I lost it. Stage fright. That's all it is. All right, I'm still watching for questions. I'm not seeing any more come in, but we'll stay on here till the very last minute, 2 more minutes. Otherwise, we'll share this replay online. We'll share the deck on the community as well. And I think we're going to even get it uploaded to Learning at Broadcom. So we're going to get this information to as many people as possible. Thank you all for coming. And thank you, Clay, so much for that great information.
Yes, thank you everyone for attending today. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's really it. Thanks, Lynn. I think we can wrap this up.
All right, bye folks, have a great day.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks.